And our guest is the esteemed lady from the Center for Security Policy, and I think she's on the line right now.
She is.
She is. This is just, you know what? I get Italian goosebumps every time she's on the line. Miss Clare Lopez. Ms. Lopez is Vice President for Research and Analysis for the Center for Security Policy, a Senior Fellow at the London Center for Policy Research, and a member of the Board of Advisors for the Canadian Mackenzie Institute. In 2016, she was named to Senator Ted Cruz's presidential campaign, National Security Advisory Team, and since 2013, she has served as a member of the Citizen Commission on Benghazi, formerly Vice President of the Intelligence Summit. She was a career operations officer with the Central Intelligence Agency, a professor at the Center for Counterintelligence and Security Studies, executive director of Iran Policy Committee from 2005 2006, and has served as a consultant, intelligence analyst, and researcher for a variety of defense firms. She was named a 2011 Lincoln Fellow at the Claremont Institute. It is with great pleasure that we welcome Ms. Clare Lopez. Good evening, Clare.
Good evening. Very glad to be with you. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for coming on, and especially with such short notice. I mean, that was I read your article that you posted on Twitter, which was from Dr. Mordecai Kadar, and it really spurred some interest and some questions. And of course, who better to answer questions on Iran than you?
Well, I don't know if there's no one better, but happy to pitch in with you tonight.
Well, unfortunately, President Rouhani was not available, would not come on our show, so we thought you would be best. So
next best. Well, I do appreciate
that. Oh. Well, the article that you posted was from Dr. Mordecai Kadar, Scenarios for a U.S.-Iran détente. And it starts out, what does the future hold for Iran? What is the possibility of bringing Iran to its knees, and what potentially could happen if the Iranian economy collapses under this theocratic regime? Could they possibly go rogue nuclear? Could they attack Israel and or any other U.S. interest, including the United States?
Well, let's take it a step at a time. So the jihadist regime in Tehran is under severe pressure right now. Most recently, that pressure comes from the United States President Donald Trump's decision to withdraw this past May 2018 from the Iranian nuclear deal, the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA, and to reimpose sanctions that had been suspended during its period of time, meaning from July in 2015. Those sanctions are pretty tough, and they also include what you might call secondary sanctions, which say that any other country or party or company that trades with Iran also will be sanctioned by the United States. So that extends it, pretty far out, including to some of Iran's largest trading partners and parties to the nuclear deal in Europe, for example, Western Europe, not to mention Russia, China, and others. So the combined effect of those sanctions and the loss of trade, commerce, investment, and combined with really massive scale corruption on the part of the Iranian leadership itself, the squandering of billions of dollars, for example, those pallets of shrink-wrapped cash that Obama sent them. The Iranian people know that money was sent off to support Iran's terror proxies, Hamas, Hezbollah, and, of course, Bashar al-Assad's regime in Damascus. They know that while they are having a really tough time economically to make ends meet, to find enough food to eat, and in some places, like Khuzestan, the province of Khuzestan down in the Persian Gulf, an Arab that, by the way, considers itself occupied territory by the Persians. The mismanagement of the environment and administration and other things has led to a situation where they don't even have potable water, drinkable water. They turn on their taps, and what comes out is brown sludge. I've seen the videos. It's awful. So the people naturally are in the street for all of these reasons. And yes, a lot of it has to do with economic tough times, but the chants that you hear from the people, and these are on the streets of Iranian cities and towns all over the country, not just the big cities like Tehran, Shiraz, Tabriz, but all over the country. The chants are not just about, give us jobs, we need to eat, but down with the dictator, death to the dictator, Marg bar dictator, meaning the supreme leader, Ali Khamenei. And so their protests in the streets are growing and growing. They've been underway since last year, end of last year, late December 2017 into the beginning January of this year. Sporadic until now, but they've been consistent. They've never stopped. And what it looks like now is that the Iranian currency, the rial, is really pretty much in free fall in terms of its value, its worth against the dollar, and it's reaching a point of hyperinflation that would be pretty hard to come out of. There are many workers on strike, including truckers. So transportation is shutting down. News out of Iran earlier today, or maybe it was yesterday, said that because of lack of hard currency, national airlines in Iran might have to shut down soon. So all of these things combined really look like what it looks like to me is a deliberate, phased process to bring down the regime in Tehran. There's a lot more to come, but this is the beginning.
Yeah, I read that inflation is growing 130% and growing, and the currency has lost at least 80% of its value, and it's still dropping, as you said. Do you think that this regime can last 2 more years under these current economic sanctions?
It absolutely cannot last even 1 more year. No, and that's good.
So
now the next steps would have to be a real shutdown, strike of transportation all over, meaning not just the truckers, but the trains, the planes, and everything, ports of shipping ports and so forth. Once that shuts down the country, then will come another phase. I mean, the final phase will probably be the most violent, but they have to go through it to get to the other side.
Wow. They're looking there. The Iranian regime is looking to last till 2020, and hopefully they can extend these talks.
Not happening.
No,
not happening.
Not happening. Now, do they get desperate and look outside of does the regime look outside of Iran, even though their inside is crumbling? And do they take any measures with regards to their nuclear capabilities, whether it's ballistic missiles or doing something that could harm Israel?
Very frequently, the Iranian regime does tend to rely on proxies. It tries to divert attention through its support for terror proxies like Hamas, Hezbollah, the Houthis in Yemen, for example. And it is very likely that they will step up their program, if you will, their agenda with those groups to try to cause some kind of a distraction away from themselves and to cause pain to Israel, to the United States. Real flashpoints and very critical points have to do with shipping channels, especially straits like the Strait of Hormuz, which is the entrance to the Persian Gulf. And also on the other side of the Arabian Peninsula, you have the Bab el-Mandeb. That is a strait that lies between the Arabian Peninsula, or Yemen, exactly, and the Horn of Africa, specifically Djibouti on the other side. Critical also waterway for international shipping. That second one, the Bab el-Mandeb, because that, of course, leads into the Red Sea and the Suez Canal. But both of them among the most critical straits in the world, and very likely that we could see threats to free shipping there, to the open passage of what amounts to a lot of oil tanker traffic, for one thing. We saw the Saudis, I think only temporarily, pause their oil tanker traffic through the Bab el-Mandeb just a couple weeks ago because of missile strikes by the Houthis, whose missiles are provided to them by Iran, by the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, IRGC. And where you get with that is to questions of insurance for the shipping. And so these could be very serious situations, and the United States has a particular responsibility there because of the strength of our blue water Navy, which takes on the responsibility of helping with our allies in the region, like Israel, Egypt, Jordan, to keep these waterways open.
Well, if Iran's going to be engaged in all of that activity around the Straits and the Straits of Hormuz, and also with, I guess, embodied in Yemen, supporting the Houthis, and they're cash-strapped at this point, boy, this could cause even a quicker bleeding to the point where you can't even wrap a bandage around this.
Well, I think that's precisely the point. Nobody here wants the Iranian people to suffer any more than they have already, which has been awful. But the collapse of the economy and the ability of the Iranian regime to trade and to conduct business financially through the financial systems, banking systems of the world is a necessary first step to the overall collapse of the regime, which I think is coming into sight. But as I said, there's a lot more left before that can happen, and in the end, it very well could be quite violent.
There's in the article under what next. I'm a little bit I'm troubled by this, but I mean I'd like your maybe a little clarification. Not that I want you to get inside the mind of Dr. Kadar, but he says what next? The best thing President Trump can do is send a Twitter message to the Ayatollah to this effect: "My dear Iranian leaders, your time is up and the game is over."
Love it. Absolutely love it. He plays mind games with these dictator thugs, as we saw him do with Kim Jong-un, Little Rocket Man, and all of that. He plays games and messes with their heads. It's beautiful to watch.
But given how unstable this theocratic regime is, I mean, could they take that as, that they're going to strike first? My question is this: I do believe that they have some sort of nuclear capabilities. To what extent, I don't know, and you certainly would know better. But I just think that they are so unstable to the point where they could be the first strikers, and that is not what we want, do we?
And destabilization, unfortunately, is the name of this game. Destabilization of the mullah's regime. But typically, what they have done in times of this kind of crisis, or when they want to make a point, as I've said before, is more geostrategic through their proxies. I think one might expect activity out of Hamas, Hezbollah, before you would see some sort of use of whatever nuclear capabilities they have. I think you would see a geostrategic attempt to light up areas of and around the region, meaning against Israel, unfortunately. But Israel knows this through the Hamas out of Gaza, which we've seen exactly these last days and weeks, and perhaps also on the northern border of Israel, meaning Hezbollah and Iran up there. pressing on the Golan Heights, which is why the conversation, the communication between Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Russian President Vladimir Putin is so important.
Okay, and in what way? Do you expand on that a little bit?
Well, because sure. So the objectives of Iran in the region and certainly against Israel are not at all the same objectives identically shared by Russia, by Putin and Moscow. Putin and Moscow have certain specifically defined objectives in that region. They want their bases, Tartus, Latakia, other places perhaps. They want a reliable arms client in Damascus, and they want a foothold. They want a presence from which to exert power and influence that competes with the United States, certainly. But they have no intention or desire to wipe Israel off the face of the map or any of these Islamic doctrinal objectives that propel the Iranian regime. And if you doubt, listeners, anything I'm saying, go have a look online at Iran's constitution, which is online in English. So Russia does not share those objectives, and it pretty much has already achieved what it wants in the region, which was that a client remain in Damascus. It happens to be Assad, but I don't think it necessarily has to be long term for the Russians. So that client is there. Their bases are secure in the Alawite heartland that Damascus has hung on to with Russian and Iranian help and Hezbollah help. And Russia has that position of power and influence in the region. Now, they've got what they want. Where are they now? They don't want to lose it. They don't want to lose what they've gained. And so it is probably the objective, it would be for me, if I were gaming this, the United States and Israel, to convince Russia, to convince Putin that unless he restrains Iran, its proxies like Hezbollah, and the megalomaniacal psychopath in Damascus, Bashar al-Assad, unless Putin restrains all of those from threatening Israel, Israel at some point will be compelled to do what it has not done up until now, which is really in a more significant way become a player and involved in the battle space that used to be called Syria. Russia does not want that kind of destabilization. So it's in its interest to make sure that destabilization doesn't happen.
Al.
Yes.
Go ahead. Yep.
Fascinating. So, Claire, where do you see Iran and President Trump negotiations going forward?
Oh, we're well past the negotiation phase. No more negotiations. We are now in the phase of regime change. Nobody's going to say that. The White House is certainly not going to make that announcement. Don't expect it. But that's where we're going.
Whoa.
Film at 11.
And to what regime would that change to, and then how would that affect the war in Iran?
That's the $64,000 question.
Gotcha.
Yeah. And I don't think that's clear at this point to anyone. But I can assess that there is quite a bit going on behind the scenes right now, because as I said before, I think that the final collapse of this regime will indeed be very violent, unfortunately. But there's no alternative, I think, to taking it down. The senior leadership will flee. I certainly hope the Ayatollahs wind up somewhere in Siberia. Others will, flee like rats fleeing a sinking ship, go elsewhere. But everybody won't be able to get out, and the people will demand their retribution, their just retribution. And that moment, that phase of collapse and chaos is what must be managed in order that what comes out the other side is really to the benefit of the Iranian people, so that they will actually now be able to have meaningful participation in a representative government, representative of them and their wishes. So the management of that intermediate phase of violence and chaos is going to be critically important. And I would be most surprised if intensive discussions are not going on right now about that exactly.
Intensive discussions, and would the United States be leading those discussions, or would it be Russia that would provide a safe haven for the operational arm?
I am talking about the Iranian opposition. The span of it, the entire span of it, which is quite extensive. Obviously, we've talked about strikers, so labor unions. We are talking about women's groups, students' groups. We are talking about the Mujahideen-e-Khalq and National Council of Resistance of Iran, both inside Iran and outside of it. I think we are probably talking about various ethnic groups which have long felt themselves oppressed under the rule of the Persian-dominated central regime.
The Kurds?
All of the above.
Gotcha. So the opposition, the Baluchis and the Jandrala,
Kurds, Azeris, Arabs, and others.
Gotcha. Wow. This could be a positive. Then, if that should occur, then the Saudis actually could regain a stronghold in Yemen, thereby stopping the Houthis for at least the time being. Then, correct? And then Hamas, where do they look? Who do they look to for funding in their rocket attacks on Israel?
Well, precisely the point. Hopefully, both Houthis and Hamas, as well as Hezbollah, would henceforth then be starved of whatever funding, training, weapons had been provided before that time by this jihadist regime in Tehran. I don't think the Saudis are looking for a stronghold in Yemen. They just want their southern, eastern borders to be secure, and their people to be secure from, Iranian missile fire out of Yemen into their cities and population centers. So the best outcome there would be that the Houthis and the others in Yemen find some kind of a negotiated settlement, and if it means division of the country again, well, perhaps that's so be it, but that the waterways, the Bab el-Mandeb, all the area around there remain free to open international shipping, and the Saudis remain free of the threat of Iranian missiles landing in their backyards.
I'm getting some questions on from different locations who want to know about the Iranians and regarding the actors and of course the current dictatorship are not rational actors as it stands. I mean,
they're very rational.
Really?
They're entirely rational, but their objectives are not our objectives. They're diametrically opposed, but they're perfectly rational.
I like that. That's a cool answer, because we see them as we see this dictatorship and this theocracy as being fanatical, but it doesn't necessarily mean they're irrational.
No, it doesn't, and I think adjectives might best be left behind. Describe them for what they are as they describe themselves, and I go again to this Iranian constitution, which is online in English, and that constitution dedicates the regime in Iran under then the Ayatollah Khomeini, now Khamenei, his successor, to jihad. This is literally in the constitution, dedicates the regime to jihad, to spread the revolution to the entire world until the entire world is under Islamic law, under Sharia. That's in their constitution. Okay? So to fulfill or to work towards that objective, however diametrically opposed it most certainly is to anything we would support, is perfectly rational. If that is your objective, if this is the commandments of your faith, and it's certain jihad is absolutely a commandment of the faith of Islam for every single Muslim on earth, just that the Iranians take it a little more seriously than others do, then pursuit of that objective is completely rational. It's just ultimately hostile and antagonistic to us, our objectives, and those of our close partners and allies in the region. Foremost, of course, Israel.
Claire, okay, what are we in the West afraid of? I mean, and I know this is the $64,000 question, but you just talked about the Iranian charter. I'm looking at the Hamas charter, Chapter 3, Article 11, calls for the destruction of Israel and the land that is there. They consider that land Palestine, and there's no question ever, it will never, ever change so long as they're alive. So why can't we take these charters seriously and understand that there is no negotiation with these individuals, with these with this leadership or dictatorships, whatever you want to call them? The fact is that they have a belief system, and you're not going to change that. So unless they change their charter, there is no negotiation.
Yeah, well, one
correct?
thing, I always call that foundational document of Hamas, written in 1987, I guess promulgated 88 or so, what they call it, which is a covenant. A covenant is a different thing than a charter, because a covenant is between the party, Hamas, and their God. This is between Hamas and the divine. It is a covenant, a sacred pledge to Allah that they will fulfill the commandments of the Islamic faith. That's a very different thing than some man-made charter that can be amended, whenever it need be. It's a different thing, because this covenant was made between Hamas, which is the Palestinian branch of the Muslim Brotherhood, and God. So it's a very serious thing when they say in there, just as you quoted, that the destruction of Israel, wiping it off the face of the earth, is their commitment, their pledge to whom? Not to each other, to God. So, no, of course you can't negotiate with that. Neither could you with the Iranian, what's in their constitution. Which, by the way, quotes from the Quran deliberately, directly, verse 860 of the Quran, which says, "Make ready your forces to the utmost of your power, including steeds of war, to strike terror into the hearts of the enemy." That's in the Iranian constitution. So no amount of negotiations on the face of the earth are going to budge these people from their commitment to their faith and the commandments of their faith. So that does leave things a lot in a much clearer situation. But I think the Israelis, remember how world opinion has been against them at the United Nations and every other place. Until this president of ours, Donald Trump, stood up and said, "We are with you, Israel. We stand with you." It was tough sledding for them. So they wanted to go through every option to show the world that they were doing everything they possibly could in good faith, including withdrawing completely out of Gaza in August of 2005. Completely withdrawing. There's no occupation of Gaza. It's all in the hands of Hamas right now, and has been since August 2005. But exhaust every possibility to show good faith, and then when the enemy, Hamas, Israel, Hezbollah, continues to send missiles and rockets and burning kites and all of the rest of it, then the world sees, and they have to put up with quite a bit, and go through an awful lot with a huge amount of forbearance, really, because they have the power to wipe out Hamas. And I think probably that showdown in Gaza is coming. I think that day will come, perhaps sooner rather than later. The war with Hezbollah will come as well. But that's it. I think Israel is trying to work through every option it possibly could to show the world it was doing its best in good faith before it unleashes the full power of its military against those who are launching missiles and rockets at its cities, towns, and kindergartens.
What happens to the oil that Iran apparently has their reserves or the ability to produce oil? I mean, is that with a regime change that could be a boon for the Iranian economy with the right people in power? Correct?
Well, sure. And if and when the Iranian people do achieve that new and stable government of their choice, then the economic climate in Iran will be inviting to foreign investment and foreign technology, which they need, by the way, to make the most of their petroleum assets, reserves. They need that foreign investment. They need foreign technology to get that all out into market to its maximum capacity. But they'll have the chance to do that. And then, the income will not be sent off to some Swiss bank account. We know, for example, that the supreme leader of Iran right now, the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, manages a personal slush fund. Well, he calls it a hedge fund of something like $95 billion with a B. That's the supreme leader. While Iranian people are living in cardboard boxes, filthy water coming out of their taps, can't find enough food to eat to feed their kids, and the supreme leader, never mind all of his top commanders of the IRGC and Quds Force and Basij and everybody else, the mullahs, have siphoned off millions and millions of income that is rightfully the Iranian people's, belongs to them. But once they get the representative government that they deserve, and they will demand now, rightfully so, then the entire economy can change. The sanctions would come off, for example, for one thing.
Well, and that's an economic boon in itself. So, yeah, wow.
Huge. But we're going to have to go through the tough patch first.
Al?
And it sounds like it's going to be quite a rough patch at that. You're talking, sounds like regime change is going to be quite troubling, and it will destabilize the entire region.
It could. It very well could. So, again, what I was talking about, the management of that interim period of chaos is incredibly important, so that the destabilization is not, entirely destabilizing to the entire region, that it can be managed, especially for those neighboring around Iran.
Jeez. What a mess in that region. Holy cow. Just thank God there's a democracy in the middle of all this that can kind of keep things together for a little bit anyways.
Well, if
in
you
Israel.
mean Israel,
Yes.
They have a lot of capability, and of course will be closely involved, I'm sure, in many different ways. But again, as you've pointed out, they will become a target for destabilization, especially as the dying regime flails about violently, probably. It will be very important to shore up Israel and to make sure that they have all the support that they possibly can need in terms of diplomatic support, as well as anything else.
What role does former President Obama play in all this in propping up the Iranian regime, the current Iranian regime, with the Iranian deal that may prolong this nightmare that we're seeing unfold?
I don't know of his involvement in any of it at the moment.
Okay.
No.
But with
not
the 150,
to say that he's not, I just don't know of any.
with the $150 billion of cash that was transferred to the Iranian regime with the 2015 deal that he and Secretary of State Kerry brokered, that caused, a continuation of what we saw in Lebanon and what we see in Yemen with the Houthis. I mean,
yes, absolutely. The Iranian people know that money was squandered away on weapons for terrorists and butchers like Bashar al-Assad in Damascus. The people know that, and their chants in the streets reflect that. They're talking about. They're saying, paraphrasing here, right? But money for us, money for Iran, not for Syria, Lebanon, Gaza, Hamas. This is what their chants are saying.
Man. Wow. Do you have time for one more question?
Okay, sure.
All right, real quick. Regarding Peter Strzok, there's talk about one of his emails that was uncovered in 2016. He stated that the title on his letterhead was Station Chief. One question is that title limited to being an employee of the CIA, or do FBI agents have that same designation?
I'm not really sure what that's about at all, because Station Chief refers specifically to a CIA officer, and one cannot hold the position of FBI agent and CIA officer simultaneously. That just doesn't happen.
Claire, I've got one quick question on another subject. What is your take on the Wahaj, New Mexico jihad camp that was uncovered?
Yeah, so this refers to the story broke in the media just some few days ago of this makeshift camp, I guess you'd call it, in the middle of New Mexico that was apparently run or led by the son of Siraj Wahaj, who is a very senior member of the U.S. Muslim Brotherhood, who operates out of a mosque in Brooklyn, New York. The son, Siraj ibn Wahaj, is the one who was arrested at the site of this place when local law enforcement, by the way, the FBI wouldn't even lift a finger to do anything about it. Finally, the local sheriff, to his immense credit, said, I'm not waiting any longer, had received a message of desperation apparently from the camp, went in, found 11 starving children, no food, no water in this place, several women, and Siraj ibn Wahaj, who was taken into custody along with the women. The children immediately cared for and put in foster care for the time being. Now, what it looks like is that the allegation, at least, is that the male here, the Muslim male that we're talking about, Siraj ibn Wahaj, allegedly was providing weapons training to the children, allegedly, again, with the intent that they would be trained as school shooters. These are the allegations. I don't think this camp has anything to do with, if people have heard about networks of camps around the United States belonging to the Pakistani Jamal Fuqra organization, sometimes called Muslims of America. I don't think this is part of that at all. I'm also doubtful that this has anything to do with the Muslim Brotherhood per se either, even though the father, that is of the father, the Brooklyn Imam, Siraj Wahaj, is certainly Muslim Brotherhood affiliated. It may or may not be that the son arrested at the site has anything formally really to do with the Brotherhood. But then what that does for me, unfortunately, is raises some very serious questions, which is that if Muslims around the country, not even necessarily affiliated with an organized group like Jamal Fuqra or the Muslim Brotherhood, are going off and conducting weapons training with children or otherwise, that's a very serious issue that we're going to have to grapple with. Now, these are all allegations at this point in time, so I'd warn about drawing any final conclusions just yet. But just think about this. If we've got weapons training going on elsewhere, this is something we're going to have to grapple with, law enforcement on the ground in those communities especially and most directly. But that could be a very serious issue.
Well, thank you.
You're welcome.
And
glad I could join you.
What is your disdain about Bashar al-Assad? You use some really cool adjectives whenever you describe him.
You mean Bashar al-Assad in Damascus, right?
Correct.
Yeah, Bashir is Omar al-Bashir is the president of Sudan.
Yeah.
So Bashar al-Assad is hanging on in Damascus. I called him a megalomaniacal psychopath because that's what he is. He has presided over the murders of upwards of 400,000, maybe more, of his own citizens to save his sorry regime, and how many more millions displaced, refugees, or internally displaced, never mind injured. That's a megalomaniacal psychopath. That's what I'm calling him.
But why? I mean, obviously Russia continues to harbor this individual. Is it because of the access to the ports and access to key?
It's because of those objectives I told you before.
And that's the only reason then.
With that regime, Russia gains those things. Without that regime, it loses its foothold in the southeast littoral of the Mediterranean Sea. There is no other option for the Russians except that. That's their only foothold in that area right now.
It's funny because Holger in the chat room had posed the question of your disdain for Assad, and I noticed that whenever we talk about you use some very clear adjectives to describe the maniacal individual, and I just thought it was funny.
Well, when you look at the human cost, I mean, you know, the human tragedy of what has happened to those poor people over there. They are Christians. They are, maybe there's a couple Jews left. They are Sunni. They are Shiite. They are Druze. They are across the span of sects and ethnicities and tribes. And they have been devastated by 7 unremitting years of vicious, savage warfare, bombardment from the air, the wholesale destruction of their cities. On just the human scale of the disaster, you know, has got to bring us up short.
Well, it's going to be interesting to see what's going to transpire in Iran and then, of course, in Syria and Yemen as a result of the Iranian regime potentially collapsing. And, you know, do you believe in your last comment? Do you believe the Trump administration is capable of getting through this and handling this type of a regime change? Not to say that they are involved in it personally, but this is a big deal. I mean, you know, that we are facing.
What I would say is that I would not be anywhere near as confident of the way that this may be able to be directed and turn out for the Iranian people and those in the region too, were not Donald Trump president of the United States. Beautiful.
Great answer. Thank you for that. That was a very good answer. That kind of gives us hope that we have adults now in the White House and in this administration. So, well, Clare, thank you very much. It was very short notice, and I really do appreciate you taking your time to come on the show this evening. And if elements do change in Iran and things happen, we'd love to have you back to discuss it further. And
sure.
Let's hope that the right
things.
Very, very much appreciated for taking your time out of your busy schedule.
Absolutely. Glad to be with you guys anytime. So thank you.
All right, Clare. Thank you so much, and have a fantastic week.
Thank you. You
Bye,
too.
Clare.
All right.
All right. Bye-bye.